As Allied forces closed in on Japan in 1945, thousands of wounded female soldiers faced an impossible choice, not between life and death, but between methods of dying. These women weren't just casualties of enemy fire, they became victims of their own cultural doctrine. What drove scores of Japanese women in uniform to choose mass suicide over surrender? The answer reveals one of World War II's darkest chapters that history textbooks rarely mention. 1. The forgotten female warriors of Imperial Japan. What if I told you Japan's military included thousands of women who served not just as nurses, but as combatants? Their story remains largely untold. When we picture Imperial Japan's wartime military, we typically imagine male soldiers devoted to emperor and nation. The reality was more complex. Behind the masculine facade of Japan's military machine worked an estimated 50,000 to 100,000 women in various military capacities. These weren't just Red Cross volunteers or factory workers. They were fully integrated into the military structure. Some carried weapons, others managed communications, and many worked as medics in combat zones where the line between healer and soldier frequently blurred. The Japanese government's official stance maintained that women were homemakers supporting the war effort through domestic duties. This carefully crafted image masked the systematic recruitment of women into military service. The disconnect between public presentation and operational reality helps explain why these female warriors faded from historical memory. Recruitment methods varied dramatically. For Japanese women, patriotic propaganda emphasized service as the highest expression of loyalty. Government campaigns targeted young women through school programs, community organizations, and media portraying military service as an extension of traditional feminine care roles. A surprising number volunteered, especially after 1943, when Japan's military fortunes began to decline. In occupied territories like Korea, Taiwan, and parts of China, methods were often less voluntary. Women were conscripted through systems of quotas imposed on local governments. Some families offered daughters to curry favor with occupation authorities, while others saw daughters taken through direct force or economic coercion. The imperial military's notorious comfort women system operated in parallel, though distinct from the female military personnel described here. Once enlisted, these women filled diverse roles. Most initially served in nursing and supportive capacities, but as the war intensified, their responsibilities expanded. Communications specialists managed sensitive military intelligence. Others worked in supply chain management, freeing men for frontline duties. In the war's later stages, many received weapons training as part of last-ditch homeland defense preparations. The military hierarchy maintained strict gender divisions even as practical realities blurred them. Female personnel received different uniforms, separate quarters, and modified training regimens. Their oath of service emphasized loyalty to the emperor, but included additional clauses about maintaining feminine virtue while serving. Despite performing similar duties, women rarely received the same recognition, pay, or advancement opportunities as male counterparts. Military hospitals became the most common posting for female personnel, creating a dual identity that would later prove fateful. These women developed technical medical skills while simultaneously absorbing military values. As one survivor later recalled, "We were taught that our hands were meant to heal Japanese soldiers so they could return to battle. But we also learned that those same hands might need to take life, the enemy's or our own, if circumstances demanded." Training for female personnel emphasized psychological conditioning alongside practical skills. Daily routines included emperor worship, nationalist indoctrination, and specific instruction on the shame of capture. This ideological training proved as important as medical or communications training in determining how these women would respond when facing defeat. The Japanese military system valued these women's contributions while simultaneously viewing them as expendable. This contradiction became increasingly apparent as Allied forces advanced. Hospital commanders began instructing female staff on emergency protocols, euphemistic language for organized suicide. Documents later recovered showed female personnel were included in defense plans not just as caregivers but as final, sacrificial defenders of military installations. 2. The doctrine of death before dishonor. The military's emergency protocols revealed a disturbing truth about Japan's wartime psychology. Imagine being a wounded female medic, surrounded by dying patients and being handed not additional medical supplies, but a grenade, with explicit instructions to use it on yourself and your patients rather than face capture. This wasn't a spontaneous act of desperation. It was the culmination of a calculated cultural doctrine that had been brewing for decades. At the heart of this doctrine was gyokusai, an ancient concept meaning to shatter like a jewel. Originally a samurai principle emphasizing death with honor rather than the shame of surrender, Imperial Japan's military leadership transformed it into something far more sinister. What once applied exclusively to male warriors in feudal Japan became weaponized against the entire population, particularly women in military service. Historical records reveal how military leadership systematically corrupted this concept. The traditional Bushido Code, which allowed for surrender under specific circumstances, was rewritten in military manuals from the 1930s onward. These revised texts explicitly removed the honorable pathways to surrender that had existed in samurai tradition. One military handbook recovered after the war stated, "The shame of capture brings eternal dishonor not only to oneself, but to 7 generations of one's family." Women became special targets of this propaganda campaign. Government-produced films like Wives of the Rising Sun portrayed female characters choosing suicide over capture, presenting these fictional deaths as the highest expression of feminine virtue. Posters distributed in women's barracks and hospitals featured slogans like "Purity in death," "Shame in surrender," alongside images of serene-looking women in military uniforms preparing for self-sacrifice. The indoctrination was relentless and methodical. Beginning in 1943, as Japan's military position deteriorated, the Ministry of Education mandated special honor instruction for all female personnel. These sessions, documented in military archives, explicitly taught that rape and torture awaited any woman captured by Allied forces. Instructors distributed graphic pamphlets showing supposed atrocities committed against captured Japanese women, many later proven to be fabricated by intelligence services. Fear became as powerful a motivator as honor. Government radio broadcasts and military newspapers circulated horrific stories about the fate of captured personnel. One military hospital newsletter recovered from Okinawa contained this chilling passage: "The enemy forces the captured to watch as they violate our women before executing them both. Is this the fate you would choose over an honorable death?" The physical preparation for mass suicide was equally methodical. Military supply records from 1944 to 45 show hospitals receiving unusual allocations, not of medical supplies, but of grenades, cyanide capsules, and ceremonial daggers. These weren't emergency measures, but part of a calculated defensive strategy. Training manuals specifically instructed female personnel on suicide techniques, including detailed diagrams showing how to position grenades against vital organs for instant death. Perhaps most disturbing were the official military documents outlining what they called final defense protocols. One such document recovered from a hospital in northern Japan stated, "Female personnel will eliminate all patients unable to fight before eliminating themselves rather than permit enemy capture of imperial subjects." These weren't suggested actions but formal orders, stamped with official military seals. The psychological conditioning was so effective that many women came to view suicide as not just a duty, but a privilege. A military nurse's diary recovered in Okinawa contained this revealing entry: "I am honored to have been entrusted with the sacred grenade. When the time comes, I will use it to protect my patients and myself from the American devils. This is my contribution to the Emperor's divine will." By early 1945, this doctrine had created a deadly psychological trap for female military personnel. Japan's propaganda machine had successfully transformed surrender from a military option into an unthinkable moral failing. For thousands of women serving in military hospitals and installations, death by their own hand had become the only conceivable response to approaching Allied forces. 3. The tragic final acts. As Allied forces closed in on Japanese territory in the spring of 1945, the abstract doctrine of Gyokusai transformed into a grim reality that would shock even hardened war correspondents. What began as isolated incidents soon revealed a systematic pattern across Japanese military installations. When American forces secured positions on Saipan and Okinawa, they documented a horrifying phenomenon: entire hospital wards, where female medical staff and patients had died by their own hands rather than face capture. The atmosphere inside these facilities during the final months was one of mounting dread. Survivor Yumiko Tanaka, who served at a military hospital near Naha, described how supply deliveries changed from medicine to munitions as American forces approached. The head nurse gathered us weekly to rehearse what she called the final protocol. We practiced distributing grenades to patients and recited pledges to die with honor. Records from the 31st Naval Hospital show that in March 1945, administrators reassigned female personnel from treating the wounded to fortifying the facility against invasion. Women were organized into honor units with explicit instructions for coordinated suicide should the Americans breach their defenses. One recovered document entitled Final Defense Measures outlined a chilling 3-stage protocol. First, mobile patients would be armed to fight. Second, immobile patients would be released from duty, a euphemism for euthanasia. And finally, all remaining personnel would complete their service to the Emperor. The scale of these events defies comprehension. On April 4, 1945, at a military hospital in southern Okinawa, 87 female staff members and 143 patients died within a 2-hour period as American forces approached. Similar incidents occurred at no fewer than 14 documented locations across the Pacific Theater between February and August 1945. Methods varied based on available resources. At larger installations, military police distributed grenades with specific instructions for their use. Nurse Sachiko Imada's diary, recovered by American forces, contained precise diagrams showing how to position grenades against vital organs for instantaneous death. At facilities where explosives were unavailable, medical staff repurposed their own supplies. Intelligence reports document finding wards where potassium cyanide had been added to patient medication, creating the appearance of peaceful death. Not all women embraced these protocols willingly. Survivor Keiko Miyazaki recounted the immense psychological pressure. Those who hesitated were reminded that capture meant violation of our bodies and betrayal of our families. Our commander told us that Americans would use us to extract information about defenses elsewhere, making us responsible for more Japanese deaths. She escaped only because she was unconscious from a bombing when her unit carried out their final orders. U.S. military intelligence files contain dozens of after-action reports describing these discoveries. Lieutenant James Harrigan of the 6th Marine Division wrote, "Upon securing the hospital compound, we discovered approximately 120 bodies, primarily female nursing staff and patients. Evidence suggests coordinated suicide approximately 3 to 4 hours before our arrival. Many still clutched photos of family members. The scene defies description." American medical personnel attempted intervention when possible. Navy Corpsman Theodore Wilson described encountering a female soldier hiding in a storage closet. She was maybe 19, wounded in the leg. When we found her, she reached for something in her pocket. Our translator convinced her we weren't going to harm her. Later, we found a cyanide capsule in her uniform. She was one of only 3 survivors from that facility. While Emperor Hirohito never explicitly ordered these suicides, declassified communications reveal that regional commanders received imperial commendations for preserving honor at facilities where mass suicides occurred. A recovered memo from General Mitsuru Ushijima, commander of Okinawa's defenses, explicitly instructs hospital administrators to ensure no Japanese woman falls into enemy hands, indicating clear authorization from the chain of command. The untold story of Japan's female soldiers forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how warfare transforms societies. These women weren't simply victims of circumstance, but individuals navigating impossible choices within a system that weaponized their sense of duty. Their tragic fates reveal the devastating power of nationalist indoctrination when it intersects with gender expectations during wartime. If this glimpse into history's darker corners resonated with you, join our community by subscribing to History on Fleek. We'd love to hear your perspectives. How should these women be remembered in our collective understanding of the war? What other forgotten World War II narratives deserve our attention? Share your thoughts below.